it's important to remember that it's not that women are naturally different or naturally more take things harder, less resilient. It's really that we've been socialized to, I think, to please people and to make sure everyone's okay. And when you make a mistake, you're letting people down. And so it can touch something really deep for women.
I'm Jill Avey, a career success coach, and this is SisterSmart Leadership, the show that explores how women can rise from director to vice president and beyond by fully leaning into their feminine energy as their biggest advantage. Let's get you one step closer to the recognition and promotion you deserve. What happens when you have a failure, like you made a mistake at work, even a big mistake, or you get rejected, even for something that you thought was a sure thing? I've talked to a lot of people about failure because this is a topic that we don't often talk about. In fact, it's sure tempting to hide away and lick your wounds after something big has happened. Sometimes people let it derail them or even end their career. But what happens when you use failure to propel you forward? It's my pleasure to introduce you to Jessica Bacall, editor of 2 top 10 books, Mistakes I Made at Work and The Rejection That Changed My Life. I read her first book about a year ago, and it was so refreshing to hear these very successful women talk about their own grit and resilience after their own setbacks. So Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So after writing these 2 books, what shifted for you in the way that you see failure, both like mistakes and rejections?
I think part of why I was drawn to this topic is because it is hard for me. And that's why it was compelling. So it wasn't like, okay, it's fixed. And now if I mess up at work, like I wrote these books, so I don't have any problem with it at all. But I started to there were some strategies and some mindset shifts that were useful to me. So like there were at least 2 people in my rejection book who talked about aiming for rejections on purpose as a way to put yourself out there. Like instead of putting yourself out there and hoping you don't get rejected, be like, I'm going to try to get 20 rejections. I'm going to send out this manuscript. Or there's a story of someone who tried to get 100 rejections, which led to some real successes. And I think if you're putting yourself out there strategically and thoughtfully, it doesn't mean you should do 100 willy-nilly submissions where it's not careful, it's not well thought out, if you're a writer, for example, like me. But I do like the idea of kind of flipping the script and being purposeful and almost like planning for rejections. And in terms of mistakes, I guess you could think about it the same way. You could even go into a new role and think for yourself like, okay, I bet I'm going to make there's going to be at least 3 mistakes that I'm going to make, and I'm going to have to get through them, be resilient. So you could try to flip the script in that way too.
You know, Dyson's kind of famous for that, of really celebrating that they went through 10,000 iterations to create the amazing vacuum cleaner that they have. And that they really celebrated when something didn't work because of the learning that they got from it. So I think that's kind of a neat thing to do. And you're also reminding me of when I was in sales early in my career. I sold fax paper over the phone as the first job that I had in my career, which is really a very long time ago now. But we used to celebrate it when we got somebody that hung up on us, because that was sort of the worst thing that could happen. And it felt so mean and hurtful when you started out, but you kind of got this thick skin, and we would be like, they got hung up on, and just make it fun so that it wasn't something we were afraid of and held us back.
Yeah. And I think that thick skin is something that the books have helped me to develop, but it's also about just getting older and having more life experience.
That's true. Yeah. You can relate to all of the things that have happened throughout your life so much easier when you have more years of experience. Love that. What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe been hanging on to a failure for a long time?
It's so individual. To be honest, I would say find a good therapist. I've gone to a lot of therapy. I think that sometimes there are reasons that we're hanging on to a failure that have less to do with our career trajectories and what other people think of us, and more to do with things that those failures bring up. So Absolutely. If you don't have a therapist, or I might look for one, I think talking about the failures with people who you care about. There's one interview in my first book with Danielle Offrey, who's a doctor, and she talks about an error she made as a surgical resident, and it ended up being fine. The patient was fine, but she held on to it for so long without telling anyone. And now she really encourages young doctors to talk about their mistakes because it's a way to improve patient care, first of all, but it kind of can disentangle like mistakes from shame. And so I think talking about it, finding someone, maybe there's not someone at work. Like sometimes we don't feel like we can talk to someone at work, but talking to someone, to a friend or romantic partner.
Yeah. Brene Brown talks about shame withering in the light. And I love what you're saying about if you're hanging onto it for a long time, there's something more there for you to learn from this. And that it's bringing up something that's maybe it's from your past or how you grew up or your family system. And that's really great to work through. I think everybody should have a therapist to talk through these things with. And super
and
helpful.
Some people are more sensitive just naturally. I have a colleague, Malika Donaldson, who is an education professor here at Smith, and she studies mistakes and she looks at kindergartners. And there's some who just really, they can make a mistake and move on. And some even from kindergarten who are more demoralized than their 5-year-old peers.
Fascinating. That's really interesting. And I think women tend to hold on to mistakes longer than men do because men are more socialized to, at least the men of our age group, they're more socialized to just brush it off and, oh, well. Guys can do that so much easier. It's just, oh, well. I think that we're maybe hanging on to things more, ruminating about them more, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes. There was a researcher who people may know of, this woman, Susan Nolan Hoxema, who was at Yale. She sadly died, I think, about a decade ago. But her research was about rumination, women in rumination, and that women are more likely to be ruminative, which is an unhealthy way to respond to a problem because it doesn't get you anywhere. Rumination is like, it's like processing it over and over. And, I can't believe I did that. And just kind of going down into that pit that feels bad. So.
Right. And you actually re-traumatize yourself by going over and over again in it. And so, yes. Okay. So that leads me to my next question of what would you recommend for people who have just had a failure? So not ruminating over it would be our first recommendation, I think.
Yeah. There's a mindset thing. I like see if you can separate like the failure from yourself. Like you are not the failure. I do think talking about it, there are several people in my books who talk about like, it's better to be honest. If it's something that affects the company or affects a patient, it's certainly better to be honest than to kind of get yourself into a bad situation where you've covered something up. So I think try to separate yourself from the failure, figure out what you need to do to resolve it, who do you need to talk to, find those supports outside of work who will help you, who will take you out for sushi or make you feel a little better or say, hey, let's go to a movie. And it's just so hard. So I do think you have to have that support system. Take your dog for a walk, but just try to give yourself a little bit of a break. I do think people are so hard on themselves.
Reshma Saujani talked about this in your book. She went for a congressional bid and lost, and she didn't have a plan B. Like she didn't know what she was going to do next. And she gave herself 2 weeks to feel sorry for herself and to process it, basically.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so nice that she put a limit on it. And I'm going to give myself this time. I need this time.
Yeah.
And yet I'm not going to stay in it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to do it. Allow yourself, she says, I allowed myself to wallow. Give yourself a time limit. Maybe you only need an hour or two. Maybe you give yourself 24 hours. But then just say to yourself, I'm going to be done. And I'm going to move on. And then in her case, she was able to really find, well, what was really making me want to run for Congress? She really wanted to help people. One thing she wanted to do was help young women in her district, young people in her district stay plugged into technology as technology was advancing. She represented a district in Queens, and she ended up, one of the things that she's done a number of things, but she ended up founding Girls Who Code as a way to introduce girls to coding.
And think if she hadn't have not gotten that job as a congresswoman and not gotten the next job that she got, which inspired her to start that, how many young gals wouldn't be impacted by this incredible nonprofit that she has now?
Yeah.
It's neat to think about. This is your second book, is The Rejection That Changed My Life, and what happened as a result of that. And I love to think of.
And sometimes the thing that you figure out, your pivot, it might feed the same need in you or might even be better. in a way. I had an experience at Smith I'd been here for many years and I applied for a job. The rejection book kind of emerged from this rejection. So I didn't get the job that I wanted, but what I ended up being able to do, I'm still at Smith, was actually even better. I know that doesn't happen for everyone, but it's like sometimes it just feels bad to be not wanted, but you might end up like doing something that feels meaningful to you in a deep way. Something you couldn't have imagined.
Yeah, that reminds me of the previous episode that I did where I talked about Sally Krawcheck's experience, because she was saying she was let go as a CEO from 2 very large banks. And she was saying that when something like that happens to you, by definition, that's not the place for you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so by recognizing that and saying, okay, well, what is the right place for me and where do I fit? And when we can take the lesson that's in this, then we can make better out of it.
Yeah.
If you just move on and try to shove it into the closet and pretend like it didn't happen, you won't get that lesson and you may not have that next great thing happen. Are there any other differences that you see between how men and women handle mistakes or failures?
I think the rumination is the biggest thing. I think that's the biggest difference in terms of what I understand. My research, I didn't look at men. I really just looked at women because I work at a historically women's college and I was interested in women. I think it's important, and I know you talk about this a lot in your work, that it's important to remember that it's not that women are naturally different or naturally more take things harder, less resilient. It's really that we've been socialized to, I think, to please people and to make sure everyone's okay. And when you make a mistake, you're letting people down. And so it can touch something really deep for women. But I do think that there's a major age component here where it's such a boon to grow up, to get older. I think as we get older, I think we do learn from our own histories and from what we see with our friends, our colleagues, and we can take lessons from everyone around us.
And I love having women like the ones who are highlighted in your books to look to, of women who are taking risk and trying something big. And even when it doesn't work out, they're still going bigger and it doesn't have to stop you. And so these are lessons that we can all take and get inspired from.
Yeah.
After some of the ups and downs of your career, what would you tell your younger self, knowing what you know now?
Well, I think I felt a lot of pressure when I arrived at Smith to get things done quickly. I was involved in starting center here, and I think I would tell myself a couple of things. I would say learn the culture where you are. Don't try to like race past that, because that's something like it's hard to go back. And when you trip over the culture and you, for example, at a college, people do things really slowly and they do things really collaboratively. And so you might get a center up and running really quickly, but annoy a lot of people in the process. I also think I've learned, even in the past 5 years, I've learned a lot about collaboration, and that collaboration isn't, I have an idea and I get someone who's nice enough to smack their name on it. So this is ours. Look, we're doing this together. I think real collaboration where you are building collegiality and real collaboration is where you sit down. Yes, you might have your ideas that you bring, but you're really listening. You're not overly attached to what you're bringing to a project. You're willing to start at zero. It's that over-attachment to your own ideas and to your own way of doing it and to your own pace that I think can be hard. And that's something that it's different in different cultures. I had come from teaching children, actually. And in that world, you do have to do things really quickly. I mean, it's just teachers are so overworked and people aren't worried about toes being stepped on, or it's, okay, you did this lesson plan. Okay, can you give it to me? I did that. It's almost like being a parent or something. You have to.
Yeah, you got to move.
You got to move. And in a college, I love working at a college, but it's just a different pace.
Yeah. Well, Andy Kramer talked about that in your second book, where she was at a law firm and she stepped on the toes of one of the partners by not understanding the power signals he was giving her.
Yeah.
Because she was an intern and she didn't know those things. And then she didn't get the job because he didn't like her. And So that was, I think, a great example of really learning the culture and who are the people that matter to your success, and then how that culture shifts from company to company. And the examples that you're giving from teaching school to being in an academic environment are the same if you're working for a startup versus a larger company.
Right.
You know, it can be the same kind of shift that can be difficult to make if you're not doing that intentionally.
Yeah. And so I think, I know there's some book that I never read, but it's Never Eat Lunch Alone or something, about,
Keith
I guess you can
Ferrazzi.
kind of get the point from the title, but just really spending time getting to know your colleagues and asking a lot of questions. And that's something I think I didn't do. And I didn't know I could do, because I didn't know I had permission to do it almost. So I started on a grant funded project. But I do think it's always okay to ask someone out for coffee or say, hey, do you want to take a walk? And just ask people about themselves and about the environment.
Yes, I think that's underrated for sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're building relationships and having that coffee, but we don't know what to talk about and what the best information we can get from that person.
Yeah.
Versus just getting to know them. And so when you have this cultural understanding that you can get from different people's viewpoints, because everybody has a different viewpoint of what the culture is too. And so that can be really helpful. How can we increase our resilience ahead of having a failure so that we feel maybe more ready?
This woman, Patricia Linville, talks about she came up with the idea self-complexity theory, which is that when we have these multiple parts of our lives and we don't identify only with work, but we also identify maybe as, I'm also a runner, I'm also a dog mom, or I'm also a friend. Those things, I think, bolster us when something goes wrong at work. And so I do think nourishing all of those parts of our lives instead of making our identities only about work, I think that's helpful. I think finding, again, those relationships at work, finding the people who you can really, if possible, having a lot of coffees or walks or lunches so you find the people who you really connect with. And maybe there is one. I have a lot of people I adore at Smith. There might only be one who I think I could pretty much tell anything to. And so that you only find that through getting out of your office. If you have an office or
that's all.
Yeah. I think those are two different things. It's the building the relationships at work and building a life beyond work.
I love that. That's great. Oh, so we also talk a lot in our program about self-compassion, positive talk, and how it's really vital to have great self-compassion for yourself and to be able to be your own biggest cheerleader. And we draw on Kristin Neff's work, which I know that you and I are both fans of her work. One of the things that you in your second, I believe, is the concept of backdraft. Can you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Kristin Neff talks about backdraft, which is if there's firefighters fighting a fire, if they open a door, even if they have the fire under control, opening a door and letting oxygen in can make the flames get bigger again. And she's using it emotionally, talking about that sometimes when we just allowing ourselves to go through those steps of self-compassion, which are mindfulness, acknowledging, okay, this really sucks. And then talking to yourself like you talk to a close friend. You're not a failure. You made one mistake, but it's okay. And then the universality, everyone makes mistakes. This makes you human. Those are the three elements. It can make you feel like that can open the floodgates of sobbing. Just if you get home at the end of the hard day at work and you see your romantic partner and something bad has happened, you might start crying. That it's when you're allowed, when the space is created to feel your feelings,
it's like giving oxygen to those feelings, right?
Can feel bad. It's not automatically going to feel good having self-compassion. It's not going to necessarily quickly automatically feel better, but that's part of I think the work of self-compassion is letting yourself sit with your feelings a little bit and not beating yourself up for having them.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point to make, because as humans, I feel like we're comfort-seeking machines, and any bit of discomfort we want quickly. And really the power of being successful in life is being comfortable with discomfort. And so to understand hey, this might feel worse before it gets better, but I need to go through that process of it feeling worse, potentially. Sometimes it doesn't feel any worse, but sometimes it does. So being aware that can happen and a problem. There's nothing wrong here, and you're not a horrible person because you feel worse, not better, but the better comes for sure. The better comes. So you are also the director of reflective practices at Smith College, and I'm a big fan of journaling. We use that program. And so I wanted to hear from you how we can use contemplative journaling to.
Yeah, I think writing is thinking. And so sometimes just sitting down and doing some writing can help you gain some clarity about where you are and what you think, and of course, how you feel. I love this book. You might know it, The Book of Delights by Ross Gay. It's so beautiful. The initial project was every day he would write like a short essay about something that delighted him, and he would do it for a year. And when I say short, I mean like a couple hundred words. And it's an easy read, a great read, and I think it's a good way of, it's like a great model for a journal. I love it. I think I have some exercises in my second book that could be good prompts for journaling. They're poems. One is a poem that's in the third person, and it encourages you to write about yourself in the third person. And another is a poem that I've used a lot with students that's called Things That I Didn't Put on My Resume. And I think it gets at that self-complexity theory, that idea of generating, just sitting down and being generative and thinking about, okay, what is there to me beyond my job?
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And using a prompt can really help you to that mode of thinking so that you're not in the room. And we can ruminate in our journal too. And we don't want to do the first book I see that is bringing me more into a positive state and thinking about the good things that are happening as well. So that can bring some balance. And then the second one is looking at, hey, I'm more than this. And what a really good reframe. I made a mistake. I'm not a mistake, or I made a failure. I'm not a failure. And so I think that second exercise can really help bring you out of that.
And then when you're then you can look back at your own writing and your own reflection and feel like, wow, I was really beating myself up. Chill. It's okay. I wish I could go back and tell myself it's going to be all right. But you have some of those emotions, those feelings recorded, which can be useful.
Yeah. So often we don't go back to the journaling that we've done and read through it to see how far we've come, because that can be confidence building and, have that confidence for next time we have something that we know, like, okay, it feels bad at first, but I know I'm going to get through it and it's okay. I came out on the other side. Seeing that on the paper can be. Do you find that the act of physically writing is helpful?
I love physically writing. I've been doing that lately, just like writing by hand. I do think there's something to writing by hand. And when I work with students, I try to give everyone a journal, a notebook in the writing groups that I lead, because I think that we allow ourselves to be a little messier sometimes by hand. And we can also take that notebook and go anywhere. Like sometimes it's really good to get out of your house and go to a cafe or go to a library and just give yourself a little time to be alone with your thoughts with that journal. And I think it's a great thing to try. If you're not in the habit of writing a journal, it can be a great thing to try.
Yeah. You can draw pictures. You can do a little mind map. You can, even some of your doodles can be helpful in release. So one of the things that I think is really great about your second book, and I really encourage people to get this, it's called The Rejection That Changed My Life. And you've got it here, right? Yep. And so, there's 7 exercises in the back are all excellent to go through and have on deck. Like, you never know when something's going to happen. So it's really good to have this on your shelf for that time, because it's going to come. I hope it comes for you, because if we're not pushing goals, then we're not making mistakes or we're not having rejections. And so that is a sign that we're not pushing hard enough. So this should be happening for you in your life. And this is a great resource for when it happened. And so Jessica has prepared for us the 3 that, and I always like to end an episode with something tangible that you can do. So, what are the 3 shifts that we can make today to kind of think of this topic through more?
Yeah. And I've mentioned these a little bit, but one is that practicing self-compassion, which is really hard. I'm saying to do this, and I'm not good at this, but just know about it. And even being able to say it to a friend, to having the steps in your head to help a friend is great. Yes. So that's a mindset where you acknowledge the feeling, talk to yourself like you would talk to a close friend, and then acknowledge the universality of whatever you're going through. It's a human feeling, and people have gone through it before you and probably are going through it right now and will in the future. So I think that's it. And I have an exercise in the book related to that. Writing about yourself in the third person, even talking about yourself in the third person, can be useful. But I think writing is a great tool. really allows you to get distance from yourself and whatever's going on. There was a recent book called Chatter by a researcher, psychologist named Ethan Kross. He's at the University of Michigan. So this comes out of some of his research about how useful that is in just like allowing a little distance between, like giving yourself a little distance from the issue. And then the third mindset is to just think of yourself as a complex person who is not only about work. And that's resonant with self-complexity theory. The poem that I really love to use with students and everybody is called Things You Didn't Put on Your Resume. It's a narrative of a mom. It's a mom talking about bringing up kids. But it really, when you write those things that you didn't put on your resume, there's many things obviously beyond raising kids that make us complex and interesting and give us rich, meaningful lives. So I think I'd say those 3 mindset shifts or practices, really. And those are in the book and in the exercises that I shared with you.
Jessica's been so generous to share the full exercises for those 3 mindset shifts with us. So I'm going to share that workbook for you with a link in the show notes. So make sure you grab onto that because it's really helpful to be able to see the full. Thank you so much for that. So what did you find most insightful in this discussion? What is one thing that you will try when a failure happens to you? We would love to hear about it in the comments if you're listening to this on YouTube. And if you would like to learn more about the Sisters in Leadership program to see if it might be a fit for you, click on the link below and watch the free masterclass that will take you through this process, how we work through topics just like this. So if you're a woman who wants to improve your leadership skills and move up in your career and dive deeper into these kinds of topics, I would really encourage you to subscribe either on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm on a mission to help more women get into leadership and stay there. And if that's aligned with you, I'd love to have you be part of this community and tune into more episodes on SisterSmart Leadership that will support you in becoming the leader. If you're ready to fully lean into your feminine leadership and get promoted from director to vice president and beyond, hit that subscribe button so you'll get all the episodes to come. And check out the recommended video here to see how women are rising up without playing by the old rules that built these male-dominated industries and systems.